Hello and welcome to Weird Together, the show where we celebrate the latest and greatest in independent horror films. I'm Brennan Storr, host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast.
I am Joseph Comeau, host of the Cardinal Rule.
We're not critics.
We're not experts.
We're just weird together. Joseph, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm all right. A lot going on right now. Getting ready for some changes and getting ready to move and a couple different things. Getting ready for the semester to start up. Getting ready for the kids to go back to school. So, yeah, a lot going on, but I'm hanging in there. How are you, good sir?
Same here. It's been an eventful week. As I ordinarily don't talk about other people's stuff on the show, but it's now been published to Facebook. So a friend of mine who works sometimes with me over on the Ghost Story Guys podcast, Anthony, he has suffered an aneurysm. And so I found this out on Friday, and I took a Harbor Air flight over to Vancouver. He'd been airlifted to Vancouver General, so I spent some time with him. And again, ordinarily we don't post things like GoFundMe's, but because Anthony's part of the family, if you take a look in the audio version's show notes for this show, I'm going to post the link there. And if there's anyone who cares to help out with Anthony's expenses, it would be deeply appreciated. But of course, there is no expectation. Times are lean, and again, that is not expected, but contributions deeply appreciated. And thankfully, Anthony's doing very well, all things considered. So yeah, it was just a crazier weekend than I expected. Not the kind of excitement you want on a weekend, Joseph.
Right, for sure. Well, real quick, I want to say we have a couple folks in the chat. As always, Rin Lemieux is here hanging out with us. Even good sirs. And Derek as well. Good evening, gentlemen. So appreciate y'all hanging out with us.
Hello, Derek. Good to have both of you here. And hello to our audience who are not commenting and to those who are listening afterwards. Again, our numbers keep going up. We were charting in a surprising number of countries, Joseph,
saw that.
Including my native land. We were number 30 on the movie charts here in Canada, which was very cool.
Better than a kick in the teeth.
But only just
slightly. Yeah.
We are, however, not here to talk about sudden impact dentistry.
I love that term.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's got a fairly sizable dentist appointment coming up next week, I'm not. I'd rather not think about it too much. But no, we're not here to talk about sudden impact dentistry. We are here to talk about Patrick Lussier's brand new film, Play Dead. And of course, before we talk about any film, we have to do a thing I think we only do on this show, Joseph. I've never seen this done anywhere else. That's because we are intellectual gentlemen of a certain distinction and of a certain age. When as you get older, you become a little more emotionally aware. And of course, before we talk about any film, you never go in to a movie alone. You bring in your expectations, you bring in the day you had, you bring in everything that went with you. And so before we talk about Patrick Lussier's Play Dead, we got to take apart the baggage. All right, Joseph, what, if any, baggage did you have before going into Play Dead?
Well, you did such a great job of, setting that up and explaining the importance and the absolute vital nature of examining one's baggage. And in response, I must say, I got nothing.
Nothing at all.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the director. I didn't really look into the film at all. I want to kind of go into it kind of, with kind of clean slate. Certainly once I saw, and I didn't even look at the movie poster, but once I saw Jerry O'Connell, I was like, oh, okay, there's a familiar face in here. But yeah, I didn't kind of do any kind of, I wanted to go into it clean, and I didn't have any familiarity with anyone involved in it that I knew of, at least at the time. So yeah, nothing.
Okay. All right. I went in as a fan of Patrick Lussier. I'm a fan of his work, not only because he's Canadian, which I'm always highly supportive of, any Canadian talent who's out there succeeding in the big bad world. I'm a fan of his work from way back, even his directorial debut, Prophecy 3, which the original Prophecy is one of the great 90s horror films. And I think it's now getting its due, but for a long time it was just kind of ignored. And Prophecy 2 and 3, they're lesser films, if I'm honest, but they're still entertaining films. And I really, really think that 3 is now getting reappraised, which is very cool. And he, of course, directed My Bloody Valentine, which is a remake of another Canadian slasher film. And in rare fashion, My Bloody Valentine is actually very, very good. Remakes, usually I don't give a shit, but that is exceptional. And of course, there's Drive Angry, which, Joseph, if you have not seen it, you have to see it.
Okay.
Nicolas Cage escapes from hell to take revenge on the cultists who are holding his daughter hostage. At least that is the premise. It's a little more complex than that. I won't ruin it for you.
Well, I mean, with Nicolas Cage, it really doesn't matter what the premise is, right? It's going to be a film of a certain type, isn't it?
It's amazing. I saw it with my friends when it came out, and I want to say 2011, maybe. I think we saw it twice. I bought a physical copy as soon as I could. It's magnificent. So, and also, Patrick Lucier's latest film prior to this, Trick, was a slasher film, and I really quite enjoyed that. It was critically panned when it came out, but I really quite liked it. And so I was in the bag. And the other reason I picked the film, Joseph, because for those of you who don't know, I choose the films. I kind of watch a bunch of horror and try and find something that we can talk about in a positive light, because we don't like to bag on things here. And so I'd gone through a couple things that were promising but turned out to be not very good. And then, of course, this thing happened with my friend. And so I hit the weekend, and usually by the weekend I've got something picked out. I was mid-weekend editing my other show, Ghost Story Guys, and had sweet piss all planned. So when I saw on Twitter that this film had come out, I thought, well, Jesus, I have to get on this, and hopefully this is good. And I quite thought it was. I very much enjoyed it. So yeah, there was a combination of respect and enthusiasm for the filmmaker's previous work, along with a big old Hail Mary that this was going to be the film we wanted. Because again, we don't like to bag on stuff on this show. I think it's too easy to be cynical and shitty. And I mean, we're good at it, don't get me wrong. But there's enough of that out there. So right. that is my baggage. And I'm really looking forward to breaking this down with you, because this is more of a straight ahead thriller than we've had on this show in quite a while. We've had a lot of films which are laden with subtext, which I didn't necessarily find with this one. But of course, there's only one place we can have that conversation, my friend. That's a Toctagon.
Welcome to the Toctagon. 2 men enter, 2 men leave.
All right. Oh, been laying on the couch all day, a little stiff, but I can still do this thing. Sounds like we're getting ready to have sex, Joseph. I don't like that. Yeah, not great. Not great. The only thing worse is how my teeth look on video, but let's not dwell. All right. So, Joseph, what did you think of Play Dead?
I think you liked it better than I did.
Probably. That's usually
this is a theme, isn't it, with us? So let me start by also mentioning, Jerry O'Connell, right, was certainly a familiar face, and Rin and Derek both have commented. Rin saying, "I enjoyed the movie. It was great to see Jerry O'Connell play a terrible person." Derek saying, "I always take issue with O'Connell because people used to say we look alike, which was fine when we were chubby teens, but he wanted to get in shape and married Rebecca Romaine." That's I can see. Yeah.
Fair.
So, I thought Jerry O'Connell was chilling, but I did think his character was a little two-dimensional. And I certainly they got into
the organ stealing coroner wasn't rounded out enough for you there, Professor.
I mean, right. I wanted, they try to kind of give him this sort of sociopathic kind of really kind of mentality of, whatever, almost like a political ideology sort of based on that, but it just felt a little too two-dimensional. I don't know. I think I wanted to see something just a little bit more or different. I don't know. What are your thoughts on him?
I liked the character. I mean, sure, I guess you could say that, he doesn't have an Act 3 soliloquy or something, you nerd. But no, I like the character. I mean, I like Jerry O'Connell. Rin, if you want to see Jerry O'Connell play a bad person, Piranha 3D. He plays a sort of sleazy. He plays a particular type of person. He's meant to be based on the guy who did the Girls Gone Wild series, and he is such a greasy dude in that movie. That movie itself is art. That is a wonderful movie, Piranha 3D. I think it's Alexander Aja or Aja. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but great filmmaker, and that movie's just great. But yeah, I liked the character just because he was this douchebaggy cipher you could just hate.
Mm-hmm.
The man had a loving family, Rin says.
Yeah. And then Derek says it was almost like he was trying too hard to come across as a sociopath.
Interesting.
Right? So
interesting. I mean, they very much played into that whole the idea that he's some kind of libertarian nut job who
mm-hmm.
has these arch ideas about where he fits in the social order. You know, if you told me he had a couple Jordan Peterson books at home, I'd believe you. But you know, the kind of guy you want to, if you get stuck talking to him at a party, you want to die.
Yeah.
But
well, you know, I actually have a little bit of a different angle on this. I got to tell you, I'm actually, Brett, I got to admit, I'm a little disappointed because you didn't tell me this was a biopic.
Oh no!
Because this is actually in my clearly, I think this is the Ron DeSantis origin story, right? You know, it's the tale of a humble civil servant, how he began his crusade against the poor and marginalized populations
by literally cutting them to pieces.
Yeah, I mean his political kind of ideology certainly seems comparable, shall we say?
I have to say, I do think the coroner was more successful and certainly more eloquent than DeSantis.
Right.
And his dog seemed to like him at least, which I don't think
Yes.
DeSantis can say.
They had the same hair though. So that's the one thing. Yeah.
They did have the same hair, but DeSantis does not have Jerry O'Connell's face,
Mhm.
which is, it looks like if Tom Cruise was melded with Vincent Price and carved in granite.
Mm.
Those eyebrows, he could cut you with those eyebrows. He could throw them like boomerangs. Again, that's a good looking man right there. He reminded me of the actor, I forget his name, but from Brooklyn 45, who we talked about, the one who had that very sort of period appropriate face.
Yes,
he has that similar, like, again, you know, you could break boards over his cheekbones.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So no, but all joking aside, I mean, I will say, like, you know, I thought that character needed a little something different, but I will say the film overall I thought was pretty sound. I mean, as much as I think generally the acting and writing and the cinematography was great. So overall, I just think it was a sound, you know, kind of well done film in general, but maybe for me, I think it wasn't imaginative enough. Certainly,
Right.
The twist that this coroner, you know, has an organ farm, right, at the expense of, you know, the marginalized and poor, but beyond that, I just felt like it was quite predictable.
It was predictable, absolutely. I mean, when the police officer turns up, you know damn well when the law turns up that far from the ending of a film, they're either in on it or they're going to die.
Right.
That one of two things is going to happen, and of course, in this, he happened to be in on it. It reminded me a little bit of Wes Craven's Red Eye. Have you ever seen that?
Actually, I have. Yes, I actually have.
Yeah. So in that, you know, it's not reaching for any. It doesn't have maybe lofty aspirations, but it's a very well executed thriller.
Yeah.
You know, it does what it comes to do very well. Again, I watched it twice, and I enjoyed it. I actually am I don't know if there's a physical release plan, but if there is, I might actually pick up a copy just because I don't know. I liked the world. I liked Bailey Madison as the lead. I wasn't really familiar with her aside from she appeared on an episode of the TV show Holliston when she was in her teens. But apart from that, I'm not really familiar with her work. And I really enjoyed her. I would say the brother less so, TJ, but the actor who plays TJ, I felt didn't have a lot to work with.
Yeah.
That is one of my criticisms of his characters. He's, you know, as much as you might argue that Mr. DeSantis was a cipher, I really feel like TJ is just he's a human MacGuffin. He's a plot mechanism. There's not much there. Like, he's got that stutter at the beginning of the film, but there's never really any reason. It doesn't come up again. It's almost meant to sort of be shorthand for him being something, but I just felt like it wasn't as effective in sort of putting across whatever it was they thought they were putting across.
Yeah, that felt forced. You know, they tried to make him sort of, you know, he's reading, you know, 1984 and, you know, Orwell, and okay, they're trying to pit this, or, you know, kind of pose that this is some sort of really kind of savant-like, brilliant kind of odd character, and nothing about his character actually reinforces that or builds on that. It like I think as a MacGuffin, I think is the perfect way to describe those kind of quirks in his character, because they didn't really do anything with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was meant to set up the theme of the rich and the wealthy feeding off the poor, which, obviously quite literally they're doing in this film,
Right.
and Ronnie is quite literally doing down in Sunshine State. But something that I was thinking about, and something that reminded me of, is, of course, the film opens with TJ and Ross trying to rob a dispensary. In order, what's up?
With a pellet
jokes
gun,
than usual.
with a pellet gun, right?
Yeah,
which
yeah,
seemed like a really bad idea.
I got to tell you, man, I don't have a ton of experience with firearms or robbing places, but I'll tell you, if you're going to rob a place with something that looks like a gun, it better be a real goddamn gun,
Right?
Because folks are going to treat you like it's a real gun. And it reminded me of something that I once met this guy in a bar who was hired to work as day labor on an illegal grow in the woods somewhere. And it was a last minute thing. It was trimming season, so they needed a lot of guys, and he was hired last minute by a friend of his who was a supervisor there. So they picked him up, brought him to the site, and he went in, and he was taking plants down or whatever it was he was doing. And all of a sudden he heard a gun, like a shotgun cock, and he turned around, and there was this old man pointing a shotgun at his face. And he said, "Buddy," he told me, "you have never felt how close death can be, that your whole world shrinks down to this little black barrel in front of your face." And he very hastily had to try and explain, "I was hired at the last minute." Luckily he found the guy who hired him, and they sorted it out. But again, this is an illegal grow, ripoffs happen. And it reminded me, you don't want to go into those situations with a fake gun, because that's going to end real badly.
Indeed, as it did, sadly. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was thinking on the subject of like the rich eating the poor and stuff like that. I mean, something I did appreciate about the film is that they sort of hammer that this hospital used to be much grander, but it was just gradually folded. And I'm not sure where they shot the film. I wasn't able to determine that. You and I were saying off air there hasn't been any promotion.
So here's what I would tell you. If it was filmed where it was supposed to be set, it was set in Calexico, California, which I've actually been to, right? Because it's I actually used to go there when I was a teenager and early 20s, because the border crossing goes into Mexicali, and there's Calexico on the California side. So they reference the Calexico butcher. And so if it was shot where it's supposed to be set, it was Calexico in Southern California.
Yeah, and I was going to assume that, but then I saw, because as I was saying, that there's been I've seen no promotion done for the film, and I don't know if that's because it was released after the strike started. I'm not 100%, but in an Instagram post I saw on Patrick Lucier's Instagram account, he mentioned, or his partner mentioned, that he had been down in the Los Angeles desert filming something. So I don't know if he shot outside of LA and they just set it in Calexico, or if she misspoke and they actually did shoot it in Calexico. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, he's shooting in this. It's meant to be this grand hospital that has been reduced over time. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point, because this is what happens, right? When infrastructure starts to fail, you get people setting up these little fiefdoms.
Yeah.
That they sort of take advantage of what's there, and it can become a bit of a survival of the fittest situation. And it reminded me, years ago, I ended up going for coffee with this joker who wanted to fight with me about taxes and why they were necessary. Because I think taxes are necessary. We have to pay for each other. That's how society works. Don't bother me in the comments or email me about this. But this guy he disagreed. He thought this was incorrect. And I explained to him, he said, his claim was that places should pay for their own things. So if you live here, the people who live there, they will pay for, and of course, as you and I both know, that's a moron's fantasy. That doesn't work. And it's because of things like this, because some places can't afford. I mean, this is how New Jersey ended up with crime the way it did. That, as I understand it, that ding-dong Chris Christie sort of said to the cities, well, you will pay for your own policing. And places like, what's the one where shit went really bad? Not Weehawken. It doesn't matter, not Trenton. It's one of the cities where they completely lost control of the city. They had to essentially take it back block by block, like urban warfare. But yeah, it's just a stupid fantasy. But you get these guys who move into these places who think that they somehow have achieved something, when in actual fact they're just taking advantage of institutional failure. And I thought that was a fairly pointed critique and fairly well done.
Yeah, and you look at it like when you think about it, when you see smaller countries, developing countries, and you look at all the kind of the corruption that goes on in those places, a lot of times it is because there's just not the checks and balances, because there isn't an apparatus there to maintain that, right? And listen, there are certainly long conversations about efficacy of institutions and how to set them up optimally and suboptimally. But when you have fiefdoms, again, a great word for that, you have people who can bend the rules and do things that might be unethical.
Yeah, that's it. So that's a subtext in the film that I felt was well executed, and I appreciate it. On a
Derek is just responding something, and you mentioned this earlier. The whole you didn't think the sheriff was in on it was kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, that was so obvious, right?
Yeah, I mean, the simple fact that, again, if they'd stop to think about it for a second, the fact that Ross, her ex-boyfriend, and TJ's accomplice, that he had been taken to the coroner, despite the fact he was still alive, you think that might have clued them into hey, perhaps this is not on the up and up. And again, I don't know how you can run an organ smuggling ring out of a small town without law enforcement being complicit. But I mean, that leads to a whole other conversation about the complicity of law enforcement in organized crime, Joseph, and we don't have the time for that.
Or institutionalized crime too.
Yep, that too. Instead, let's talk about how great the scene was when Chloe, Bailey Madison's character, is trying to free herself using a bone saw. I squirmed, man, because I thought that's going through someone's skin. That was a great scene. Not as great as the final kill, which I'm going to wax on about at length in a little bit, but just, again, she trying to cut herself out with the scalpel at first, and I got all squirmy because I thought that's going in her wrist, and then that didn't work out, and then it was the saw. And even watching it the second time this afternoon, I got all kind of tense about it.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a chance to kind of depart from you a little bit here, in that this reminds me of something about the film that I wish they had done different. So they set it up that Bailey Madison's character, is studying medicine, right? And then she when they're going to get the medication that she's going to use to kind of pretend that she's dead, and she has this line where she explains, she tells the pharmacist and nurse, whoever is giving the medication, exactly what it is and what it does. So they're setting her up as this person who has all this medical expertise. And I think the film could have been more imaginative or had a different angle or something more if they would have leaned into that a little bit more, like had Bailey's character maybe a little more of Breaking Bad Walter White in her, right? There were some points where, and I think you're going to talk about one of the kills, where she used some knowledge, scientific knowledge of how things and physics work. But I think it would have been really interesting if, instead of it just being her trying to escape this sociopath, Ron DeSantis origin story villain, if she was matching wits with him a little bit more, using some of her medical scientific knowledge more extensively. And listen, it's easy for me to sit here and say that. I'm not giving specific examples for that could have been done, but I think it would have added a little bit of a MacGyver-y, even more so, twist to it that could have been much more interesting. So that's something I would have liked to have seen with her character more in this film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that she knew a lot about medicine when they needed her to know a lot about medicine, but then when they needed her to be a little less skilled or to be more rattled, then that was disregarded. Like, when she finds the fake gun in
the evidence room.
The evidence room. Thank you. And of course, that was the fake gun Ross used to rob the place. And I mean, as the coroner points out, if you know anything about this field, you'll know that if there was a real firearm, it would not just be left in a box somewhere. And again, she still managed to use the gun to her advantage, but it was a little bit of a lapse there. And you think, okay, well, she probably would have
Yeah.
known that. And I mean, now again, I've handled real guns. I've not really handled pellet guns, but I feel like you would know the difference. But again, that I don't know enough about pellet guns to say. I mean, again,
Mhm.
certainly it was, you hold a real gun in your hand. It's a thing, it doesn't feel like anything else. But again, I don't know enough about pellet guns to know the difference, to know that whether or not someone who is completely unfamiliar with it, and I'm not a gun guy, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be one of
Yeah.
those guys who pretends I know a lot about fucking guns, because I don't. But I know enough to think that, oh, you think you might notice the difference, but maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not only obviously when you hold one, the weight is different, but I would think it would look, the pellet gun, you would recognize the look. I mean, I think she might have known it was a pellet gun.
Oh, okay. She was
I
hoping
think
he
she
didn't
was,
know.
I think she was trying to, fool him. So what she didn't know is that he knew, apparently.
He didn't know. Yeah. Okay. This is like a nesting doll of things people knew.
Right. But yeah, in general, though, it seemed like she was a smart character. I wish they would have leaned into that more.
Yeah, I did enjoy at the end of the film, of course, there's a character of Mannix, who is obviously part of the smuggling ring, who the sheriff turns against. And so when the time comes, Bailey and TJ sort of align with Mannix to take these other two guys down. And then she just, in order to get the money from Mannix, she takes out the doctor's liver after having killed him. And there was a part of me that wanted, especially because of the spectacular kill, the way that the coroner is finally killed, there was this part of me that wanted to see a Bailey and Mannix movie where they're just going across North America, kicking ass and stealing organs.
Okay,
I particularly, I love that, Mannix, the guy, refers to himself in the third person. I thought he was great. He didn't have a ton of lines, but he delivered, because you think at one point he says Mannix is a bad dude. And I thought, yeah, I believe that. But at the same time, like some of the sons of bitches I've known, this could still be fun.
Well, it was interesting because they are, you're kind of rooting for him at the end, and they kind of align with him. And this guy is, kind of helping with a black market, organ operation. But okay, so maybe though he's not quite as bad because he thinks he's just taking organs from people who are already dead and isn't on board with the whole, organ farming of people who are in a state of, prison, those poor sons of bitches, that we saw
Or in
that
the
one room.
basement.
Yeah. So maybe he's only kind of bad because he's, involved in something illicit, but he's not on board with the whole taking them from people who are alive kind of a thing.
Maybe, yeah. I do want to talk about that. I think if the film, again, I really liked the film, but I think if it had leaned into more of the really diabolical stuff, like the basement full of winos who he's using for spare parts, or him taking out Ross's liver while Ross is still alive, I think if they had really leaned into that diabolical side of it, I really think they would have had a film that people are talking about for a long time. As it is, again, totally solid film. Really enjoyed it. But I think if they had leaned into that, like the final kill, the two final kills, the way they kill the sheriff and then the way they kill the coroner, that is legendary tier shit, especially the coroner kill. Because the coroner, of course, she sprays, is it liquid nitrogen?
I believe so, yeah.
In his face, and then shatters half of his face. He looks like the Phantom of the friggin' Opera. And it is the greatest. The greatest. The satisfaction of watching her burn his face and then smash it, just a wonder. I cheered both times. And then he's coming after her and half his face is missing. And I'm like, this is the best. And again, if there was a film where the half-faced coroner comes back, fuck it, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. I mean, given how he ends up, that's probably not going to happen. But when her and Mannix kind of double team take him down, I was just, like the end of Rocky, shadow boxing. Very, very happy with that. And again, it was just so gross and wonderfully executed. I thought, again, if it had been more like that, it really would have been something to see.
Yeah, and I thought the kill of the sheriff was pretty interesting too. Obviously she used a little bit of science there with the canister. But I agree with you that the sort of the organ farm in the basement, it was disturbing, but from a horror film perspective, kind of underwhelming. They just, there was a little bit of the jump scare when the one guy opens his eye and you're like, oh, this person's alive and conscious, and asked her to put him out of his misery. Um, but I felt like they could have done so much more with that. I mean, if again, it felt kind of underwhelming within the context of horror films. It's like, oh, okay, that's a little creepy, but all right.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Again, just a little underdone. Though I will say, when the coroner realizes that there's no way back from this, and he starts closing out accounts
Mhm.
by killing the guys, the basically the organ, uh, the homeless people who he's harvesting organs from one at a time. He's keeping them alive. The old man, who is played by Josh Harp, if I've got the name right, he had originally, because he's missing an eye, he's missing all these parts of himself. There's no way he's getting out of there, and he begs Chloe to kill him. And of
Yeah.
course, she doesn't. But when the doctor finally is about to blow his head off, he just gets this quick moment, but he
Mhm.
has this savage smile, and it was, I thought, a really, really effective moment from an actor who, again, the character doesn't even have a name. They didn't even have to show this, but they took the time to show this character's reaction, and it's such a reaction of grim satisfaction that it kind of haunted me, and I
Yeah.
really, really appreciated that.
Yeah. I interpret that as relief, right? That he's finally,
Oh, sure,
yeah.
absolutely. But there was
Yeah.
also, again, a sense of satisfaction, like I won, kind of a thing. Like
Okay.
I don't know, maybe I'm just interpreting that myself, but I just really noticed the reaction, and made it, and thought it was enough to bring it up.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah. And that character, although it was such a small part, was probably one of the more interesting and memorable in the film. You know, Certainly, again, the gruesomeness and the disturbing nature of his existence reminds me a little bit of the old Metallica music video for One, which
One,
draws film from I forget the name of the movie, but it's
Johnny,
the
get your
classic.
gun.
Yeah, that sort of life and existence where you're kind of helpless and cut off from the rest of the world, but having to continue existing, and how kind of hell that really is.
Yeah, yeah, oh god, yeah, no, yeah. I honestly cannot listen to Metallica's One,
Mm.
because I saw that video when I was a young kid, and it just messed me up so bad. It
I mean,
freaked
if
me
you
out.
if you sit with that and think about that for a while, right?
Oh,
How
I'd rather
disturbing
not,
that
thank
is.
you.
Right, yeah. It really is. It's one of those things where you're like, yeah, I'm not going to think about that because it's really existential and disturbing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, you and I were saying that this film didn't, again, not as much to talk about here. I said, and I've sort of kind of gone through most of the things I wanted to bring up. I do wanna mention, I guess there's one final grace note, but that can wait until the very, very end. But I do want to say that, sorry, my cat was making noise.
That's right.
So there's 2 things that I wasn't crazy about with the film. I thought it was too long.
Mhm.
I feel like 106 minutes for this kind of movie is too long by about 10 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, I mean, I've seen people online say it should have been about 90. I don't. That's pretty tight. I don't know I don't know what you'd have to lose to get it there, but I think maybe 106 is pushing it.
There was a lot of the dog chase stuff that was kind of
Yeah,
unnecessary.
I mean, the dog was pretty cute though.
It
He's got to be
was
the most adorable killing machine
ever, right?
in the history of cinema. Like I loved how it felt like they kind of had to edit around him because he just
Mm.
seemed more adorable than he did deadly.
Right.
When he it finally of course, at the end of the film, Bailey takes the doctor's liver, leaves him on the desk or table, and then calls the dog in, and he starts eating
Yeah.
the doctor. And I just felt like, oh, this is the dog's movie all along. The dog is the actual star of this picture, and he just seemed like such a happy guy. And I just thought, well, this is great. I mean, whatever
Happy
happens
ending.
is a happy end. And I will say, I enjoyed, before I bitch about the other thing. I did like that this was an unambiguously, by and large, an unambiguously happy ending. There was no last minute twist. There was no cynical bullshit. I mean, obviously she participated in organ trafficking to a certain degree, and Ross died a grisly death. And the institutions of this small town are corrupted beyond belief, but at the same time, they got away clean.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's just not always a given in these movies. I genuinely thought TJ was going to die some horrible death in front of her.
Yeah.
And because again, I just think films like this go for easy nihilism.
Mhm.
And I was thinking I was thinking about that going back over Patrick Lussier's films. And he didn't write the film, but still, as a director, you shape it in the process. And I've always felt that his films are not that way. They're not cheaply nihilistic. Even Trick, which was a pretty grim film, it was a pretty grim slasher film. I felt it wasn't cheaply nihilistic.
Mm.
And so I that's something about his work I appreciate. And I do think that was, again, I think that had a lot to do with him.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what was the other thing that you wanted to kind of gripe about?
Well, I thought it was interesting you liked the cinematography. I didn't. I
Okay.
thought it was very flatly lit.
So
I thought there wasn't much use of shadow.
let me say, I wouldn't say I liked it. I just thought it was solid. We watch a lot of films that are low budget, and it
Sure.
looked like a professional film. I'm not,
Yeah.
there were much better films we've in terms of that, but it was a solid C plus across the board on that kind of stuff, I thought.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
It was competent. But again, I just thought the lighting was a little flat. But
Yeah.
of course, you don't know what restrictions are working with time-wise. Again, I couldn't find any information about the film, so I don't know how many days they had. I'm assuming probably 3 weeks, something like
Mhm.
that. But who knows? I mean, with nowadays, it could be as little as 10 fucking days. So,
Yeah.
hard to say. I mean, this seemed like a really good movie for just 10 days, so I'm doubting that. But regardless, yeah. So that was my only gripe.
Yeah.
I thought there was some really great bits, like the lights on the door, the red and green LED lights. I really quite liked those.
Mhm.
I thought those were very strong, and the lighting in the organ harvesting basement, even though it seemed weird to have sort of a discotheque lighting down there, I just appreciated that. It was colorful and it was kind of different. But I just thought overall it just seemed a little flat.
Do you think it was an attempt to create sort of a very morgue kind of drab kind of feeling in the film? I mean, you think of a morgue and, being sort of this sort of place like that. I wonder if that was a style decision or if it was just a limitation to the set.
It could very well be that could very well be. But I mean, there's a film, and I was just looking it up. It's Night Watch, directed by Ole Bornedal, and it came out in 94, and then he remade it in America in 97 with Ewan McGregor, I think. And as I recall, that film was set in a morgue, but it still looked it managed the rich shadows and sort of the deep lighting. So it's very possible that was intentional, but I just felt like if it was, I felt like it didn't accomplish what it set out to do, and it ended up being halfway between what I would have wanted to see and what it was trying to do. But again, that my expectations are not relevant to how good a film is or is not. That's simply my expectation.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I think this was like it was kind of a solid textbook film that didn't, to me, it just, maybe it was just so C plus across the board. Nothing stood out as being particularly great, but nothing was particularly bad either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I liked it more than that.
Yeah.
Again, I was really invested in the tension of it. I was invested in the character, the survival of the characters. Again, the plot was not exactly a surprise. And that part of that is just coming from, I think, for me watching so many movies, but also, as we were saying, this was a little bit by the number as far as that goes. But as a genre exercise, I thought it was very well executed. And again, something I would probably watch again. I don't know if I would rent it again, because really by that point I could have bought the fucking thing. But certainly if it popped up on streaming, I would watch it. And if I knew someone who was looking for a thriller, I would recommend it, because it was also not overly gory, which I appreciate.
Yeah. There were certain parts, but no, I mean, now here in the States, I don't know if we got it for free on Tubi. So,
okay, no, it's not on Tubi here.
Okay,
or so far as I know, it's not on Tubi. I paid to rent it on Cineplex. If it's free on Tubi, I'm gonna be annoyed.
It is. It was for me. Well,
motherfucker. But yeah, so the only other thing I only had one more thing I wanted to mention. Again, it's just a tiny little thing on the way out. So I wanted to see, did you have anything else you
No,
wanted to say?
I think we've hit on everything I really wanted to talk about.
Okay. So the only other thing I wanted to mention about the film is just a little bit, just a tiny little moment at the beginning that I quite enjoyed. And I assume it was intentional. It was either that or the greatest possible timing imaginable. But when Bailey is about to shoot herself up with, I believe, the propofol, um, she she is just about pressed the needle to her arm, and you hear a train horn. And I loved that. It was just a tiny little thing, and I love the sound of trains. I grew up literally across the street from a rail yard. So to me, I have, and my hometown exists because of the
Hmm.
railroad. And so I have this love of trains and that sound. And for me, that sound always speaks of journeys,
Hmm.
of beginning and ending, and
Int-
and things far away. And so to just put that in there as she's about to do this thing, which is going to completely change her life and her perception of her community. Again, if it was an accident, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful accident, and if it was intentional, which I suspect it was just a brilliant little choice that really made me smile.
So, just a little non sequitur. I grew up, spent part of my childhood in Northern California, and where we lived was very close to tracks, right, railroad tracks, and I would hear trains, and the horns and such, pretty frequently as a child. I was like from age 3 to age 13. I lived there, and I have a very different feeling about trains. They are
Oh,
eerie to me. Like a train
really?
horn in the distance has sort of an eeriness to it, and I'm waiting
Fascinating.
for someone to do a good horror film that somehow gets a haunted train right in a way that actually works for me. I haven't really seen anything yet, but to me, trains, there's something the haunting about that echoing and that sort of that train, a horn in the distance. So
Oh, that's very cool.
yeah, I don't talk about that much, but obviously it was relevant as a contrast to kind of what they mean to you, right?
Yeah, no, I'm happy you shared that. I mean, for me, like I said, I grew up across the street from a train yard, and
Hmm.
Revelstoke, these huge freight trains, like mile long plus freight trains will pass through. Maybe not so much now, but when I was a kid, quite a bit. And I remember we would stay at my grandparents' place, and my grandparents' house was just across the river from the train. From the sorry, we were between the outbound track and the inbound track, when one was across the river and one was up the hill from us. So when you get these big mile-long trains, you would feel the ground move as you're laying in bed. And we used to stay at our grandparents' house every Saturday night. So every Saturday night, you'd be laying in your bed at your grandma's house, and just feel the ground
Mm.
move just a little bit. And it used to scare me, at first, and then I got used to it, and then I kind of came to find it soothing. And now, yeah, I find trains soothing. Although, if you want to hear, I have a sad fact for you about haunted trains.
Well, of course, now that you've said it so convincingly,
Yeah, so let's end this on a real depressing down note.
right?
So we have periodically on Ghost Story Guys, of course, it's it's paranormal storytelling show. So we tell ostensibly true life stories of the strange and unusual. And I will go hunting for stories prior to an episode coming out. And one of the things we like to do is theme episodes after a particular topic. So we've done, Taxi to the Dark, Taxi to the Other Side, which was stories centered around taxi cabs. We've done All Aboard the Dream Train, which is people's weird dreams or true, dreams that have come true, things like this. And I have always wanted to do specifically a train episode. And
Mm.
I don't think we ever have. And part of that is because I get dispirited when I find stories in the various places we search online where people clearly think that the Underground Railroad was an actual subway. And they will have these stories, quote unquote, about hearing, you can still hear the train whistle of the Underground Railroad tunnel that went under my house. And Joseph, it makes me sad inside in a way that even the death of the people I love cannot.
That does. Derek has an interesting comment here. My great grandma used to say in Spanish, "Listen to the train, how sad it sounds." I think mournful is a really
Yeah.
great word for what a train, horn sounds like.
That's really beautiful, Derek. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. So, but
Trains,
yes,
man, they bring
yeah,
it out in us.
yeah, they really do. So I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe you might one of these days put together an episode where you find stories that don't illustrate the failings of the American education system.
I don't want to say it, but yeah. Yeah.
I can say it because I'm American, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, that's your word. You can say that.
Right.
So, all right. Well, that has been our conversation about Patrick Lussier's latest film, Play Dead. It's a strong recommend for me, Joseph. It is a mid-level
Solid.
recommend for me.
Yeah, sure. If you like horror films, you like these kinds of thrillers, it's solid.
All right. Well, folks, Rin, Derek, and everyone else who's watching, everyone who's downloading the shows, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Again, we are, I guess, now in our 7th month of doing this as a regular thing.
It's been a while.
Yeah, and it's our audience again keeps going up, and it's just fun to do. So thank you for being on this journey with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not watching this on YouTube, if you're listening afterwards, please do make sure to follow our RSS feed and subscribe to us on YouTube. Joseph, my friend, where can everyone find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Comeau13. So long as Twitter continues to exist, we don't know how long that will be. Thanks, Elon. Right. I refuse to call it by the letter that he wants to call it.
At least we can't blame this one on the American education system.
No, right. Is it South African? Is that where he's from?
Yeah.
All right, okay. And also, you can find me on YouTube at The Cardinal Rule. If you are into NFL football, I do some stuff over there.
Lovely. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads as Largely the Truth. My other show is the Ghost Story Guys. I do this for a living, I swear. The Ghost Story Guys with Paul Bestel of Mysteries and Monsters. And you can find the Ghost Story Guys everywhere fine podcasts live, and also on YouTube. All the music in this show is composed and performed by Elliot Wilder, performing as The Revenants. The Revenants are a project based out of Boston, Massachusetts. You can find more from them at therevenants1.bandcamp.com or by searching for The Revenants on all major streaming platforms, where they are streaming courtesy of Night Harvest Recordings. That is the Ghost Story Guys house label. Our theme song is Rest in Peace from the album Music from Big Beige, also from The Revenants. And I guess that's going to do it. So until next time, remember, we're weird.
And you're weird.
So why do I not find the brand I'm looking for? There we go. So why not be weird together? See you next time, folks.
Let me ride.